Hey everyone, this is Paul here from the Magdalene Centre. Here to do a report on Mercury Retrograde from the 9th of April up until the 3rd of May, with Mercury eventually leaving his shadow post-retrograde on the 21st of May. Now, with Mercury, I'm sure we're all familiar with the general advice for this period, which is avoid signing any new contracts unless you absolutely have to. Be careful of your electronic goods, be careful of any travel, primarily short distance travel as opposed to long distance, which is governed by Jupiter, not Mercury, and to really focus very carefully on everything that we're saying and doing, and just dotting the I's and crossing the T's with everything that we're doing. Now, the reason why we have to do all this during the retrograde is because these are all functions governed by the linear logical mind, which Mercury rules. At this point during the retrograde, that part of our mind takes a bit of a breather, so it's powering down during the retrograde, so we're more likely to make mistakes in these areas or miss information. The reason our mind is doing this is because when we focus on stuff, we can develop tunnel vision and we miss a lot of information which is there and our subconscious mind is taking it in, but we haven't acknowledged it in any way because we had the blinkers on and we weren't paying attention to the information coming to us. So during the Mercury retrograde, these blinkers kind of fall off and the bigger picture is suddenly presented to us. So it's the time we're shifting from attention when Mercury's direct to awareness when he's retrograde. And that's why we tend to experience chaos, because we're used to straight linear thinking, everything being logical, and suddenly with awareness we kind of realise that things are not as straightforward and logical as we think. There's a much bigger picture available that we're missing, and it's, if you wanted a mathematical example of this, it's a bit like the Fibonacci Spiral in the way it's typically drawn. You've got squares drawn, which is the masculine boxes, but you have this sacred spiral uniting all the boxes together in a continuous movement. And during the retrograde, we're moving away from the boxes and looking at the spiral itself, which is the feminine. So it's a time where some more functions that we tend to think of as masculine take a bit of a back seat to allow the feminine, the awareness, the holistic thinking to take over for a bit, so we can get a better idea. This is why it's important that we reevaluate, we reflect, we repeat some of the stuff that we've done in the past in order to resolve it. And it's basically periods of completion is what Mercury retrograde is about. So any unresolved business is what we really need to focus on during Mercury retrograde, rather than looking at any new business at this point. Now, the signs for this particular retrograde are going to be Taurus and Aries. The Taurus phase is going to be from the 9th through to the 20th of April, and then Aries from the 20th through to the 3rd of May. Now, the Taurus phase, this is really asking us to look at our resources, our values, and really evaluate them very deeply and look at where do we undervalue ourselves, what is our real sense of worth. Now, I don't mean this purely in a financial sense here, that's a very limited view of Taurus, because self-worth and self-value and self-esteem are all important ways of grounding our identity into the physical world. If we feel worthless, then we're at the mercy of everyone else who will just dictate our worth for us. So at this time it's important that we reflect on our worth, our value, and develop a more realistic perspective of how valuable we truly are, and also take it beyond the realms of just money and look at what is it that we do for other people, how effective are we at keeping things going, how are we a stabilising force for a bigger picture of some kind. Because Taurus is about bringing stability and consistent action to something, whereas Aries is very good at initiating, but it can be a bit slapdash and impulsive and doesn't always know how to keep the momentum going once it's started. So Aries gets things started, Taurus stabilises things and keeps it going. So during this time we're looking at how can we improve our self-worth, our self-esteem, and appreciate our true value to others, and also look at how can we become more effective at managing our personal resources, because the more organised we are with the material basis in life, the more time we can free up for the spontaneity and our spontaneous nature, which is important because that's the more playful side of us, which science has shown we do need to be more playful, because that's where a lot of our creative problem solving arises from, is from play, not through deep analysis and a very logical way of being. It's spontaneous play which reveals a lot of creative solutions to the problems we see around us. Now on the 20th of April, Mercury moves backwards into Aries, so we're starting to transition into the fire signs. So with fire, we're looking at the spark of identity, our creativity and our worldview, as well as our self-expression. So in Aries, it's the spark of the I am. It's the sense of identity, it's our desires, our actions, and need to assert ourselves to get an idea of who we are. Now, that's at the end of the retrograde period. Mercury will rejoin up with Uranus, who's been in Aries since 2011 and will be until partway through next year. So Uranus is a higher octave of Mercury. They're both related to the mind, but Mercury's the kind of day-to-day mind, if you like, the mundane realms. Uranus is the higher mind. It connects us with the grander picture, the collective unconscious, and allows us to tap into revelations and intuitions and embrace change. Because one thing that we as a species tend to struggle with is embracing new change. Some people have it nailed down, they're very happy embracing new change, they like a bit of unpredictability, but let's face it, most of us are creatures of habit, and we'd rather not make changes unless we absolutely have to. But Uranus is triggering serious changes with us to try and help us see that there's far more to who we are than we think we are at the moment. It usually has to do this through shock and revelation rather than easy, because most people have been conditioned to shut off from their intuition, because the intuition guides us to the changes that we need to make. But if we've been conditioned to ignore our intuition, to shut it out and avoid any kind of change, then Uranus will be seen as a threat as opposed to a source of liberation. Because Uranus does bring liberation and freedom, but we have to be prepared to embrace change and become an agent of that change, and we also have to be willing to separate from the status quo somewhat. Now, don't have to make a complete break from it in terms of being an isolated individual. A lot of us do it by separating into specific groups who are more aligned with who we are, which is fine as long as we take personal responsibility for our own individual actions and we don't blame it on whichever groups we're with. Because if we're blaming our actions on other people, we're not growing at all. It is as simple as that. So we do have to make sure that we take personal responsibility for our actions. We don't try to fob it off on other people, and we don't put on this spiritual air and appear to be this great person, but in reality we don't take any responsibility for ourselves, and we just use various techniques to blame other people to avoid taking responsibility. I know that there's a lot of perceptions that spiritual people all airy-fairy in that because of some of these stereotypes going around and the way some people talk. But really, if we embrace the spiritual path, it's about becoming more real to ourselves, being authentic. And that doesn't necessarily mean that things are always going to be love and light. It can mean that we have to face periods of darkness in order to understand who we are better. Because when we bring our own shadow to the light, and Mercury helps us with this because he shows where some of the illusions we've been holding keep a part of ourselves trapped, it helps us to face our own shadow, to face the inconvenient truths and learn to embrace them and accept them. Because when we can embrace truth, that's when the real love and unconditional love can happen. But if we just ignore it, the shadow side will always undermine things until we actually face it and learn to love it. And it doesn't mean that we gladly do bad behaviour or anything like that. It just means that if we learn to love our shadow, it stops having power over us, and gifts within those neglected parts of ourselves can be reintegrated. So Mercury helps us to reintegrate parts of the mind that we may have neglected for some reason, and it also helps us to see whatever information that we overlooked over the past 3 months when Mercury was direct, so we can get a better idea of what the real picture of things is and make the changes necessary to incorporate that picture into our lives, and to get everything organised on a material basis, because once the material basis is organised, that frees up our time to explore our creative natures, because we're all creators in one way or another, but a lot of us have been conditioned to neglect it, whether that be through societal conditioning, various events that have happened in our lives where we've just shut down to our creative nature. It's just really the time in the year that we need to start getting back in touch with our creative nature and coming up with our own solutions to problems rather than relying on society to solve our problems for us. But first of all, we need to make sure that we have a solid sense of self-worth, because our intuition, more often than not, we need to have a solid sense of self-esteem in order to take action on that intuition in the first place. Otherwise, we might just avoid taking the action and we just remain stuck where we are. So use the retrograde period to hear the truth that's being shown to us that we may have missed or may have tried to ignore. Allow some of the old illusions to die and appreciate your deeper worth that cannot be assigned a numerical value the way money does. A value that is beyond anything money can give, and allows us to feel calm and secure within ourselves and able to take action aligned with our own personal truth and our own personal spiritual journey. So I hope that's a useful gauge of what's happening at the spiritual level. As usual, don't rush into any kind of actions in the mundane world. This is a time where we need to slow down and look at our internal nature and address it to become more empowered in the long term. Because once Mercury is direct, that's when we start taking action again based on the information that we've received during the retrograde. It's best that unless we absolutely have to, avoid taking action during the retrograde to allow all the information to be made aware of to come to us and to be integrated into a holistic picture. Because once we have that picture, we can then know better what is the best action taken forwards. But if we rush it, then some of the information that we need to be made aware of will not be integrated, and changes will inevitably have to be made which are different to what you thought they would be when the action was first initiated. That's a useful guide of what will happen during the retrograde. May it bring many blessings and may empower you going forwards on your own personal spiritual journey. Take care, be blessed.